Welcome to the November edition of Selling in Brooklyn, November 2023. Very different month from last month, so happy to have you here. We are a pretty intimate group here, so we're going to try to customize this work to address your needs as we go through. So a few housekeeping items before we get started. If you have questions as we go, please ask them in the chat, and we're going to answer them at the end unless there's something that we feel like we need to urgently address. We're going to be sharing relevant links for you during the presentation in the chat. So if you don't know how to activate your chat, we will also be sending you and emailing you a recording of this presentation, and you can access it that way. You'll also be able to contact us afterwards to answer any questions that you don't feel comfortable asking in a more public forum. So before we get started, we also want to remind you to submit to be featured in our women-owned business blog series. So if you or someone you know it runs a woman-owned business in Brooklyn, we're really looking to highlight your work. So we're going to send you a link, and if you've got somebody who you'd like to have featured, please follow that link, and we would love to share you on our blog. So we're going to jump to introductions. I'm Tina Fallon. I am a real estate salesperson. I've been working for Realty Collective for 17 years, and I love working at Realty Collective. It's a firm that was established to defy the stereotypes associated with real estate in New York City. And I'm happy to say 17 years of that, we really, I think, are still doing that. One reason or one way that we manage that is to assemble a team so that we're your coaches, your therapists, your sounding board, your backstop, and we make this process as de-stressed as we possibly can. One of the ways we do that is by introducing you to wonderful real estate attorneys such as Rashidah Siddiqui.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rashidah Siddiqui. I have been practicing real estate law going on, 20 plus years now, about to be 21 years in next year. I represent lots of sellers in all of the boroughs, including also Long Island, Suffolk County, and Nassau County. Just here to once again give you an overview of how you should prepare yourself as you think about putting your property on the market. I'm a small law firm. Our main office is located downtown Brooklyn, but also have a partner, John Serpico, and also an associate. And so we represent lots of sellers in all of the boroughs and can give you kind of like the nuts and bolts on what you should do as you sell your property and things you should think about. So look forward to discussing that with you this afternoon.
So we're part of the dream team that you would have to assemble. We really, really recommend you get talking to a real estate agent and a real estate attorney at the very beginning of this process. So let's take you through it. First big question we ask is why sell now? As you may have heard, it's not a great seller's market right now. Times are tough for buyers. Interest rates are very high. And so that is impeding their ability to purchase homes at top prices. That said, inventory is very tight as well. And so we're seeing that keep prices high. So it's not actually a terrible time to sell. It's just a really tricky time to sell. But it doesn't matter, because all that matters is it the right time for you to sell? So if you're trading up to a bigger space, if you're downsizing from something bigger, if your property is in a real high demand category, or if you're ready to move out of New York City, please don't. We love it here, but if you have to go, you have to go. Those would all be reasons why you might want to sell now. And if you do feel like now is the time, there's some things to consider when you're thinking about selling. So we go to the next slide. The market has been in a constant state of flux over the past few years. There was a huge kind of gold rush after the pandemic, or kind of during at the tail end of it, and then through to 2022 when interest rates were so low. And so you probably saw your neighbors sell for historically incredibly high prices, it's reasonable to assume that you would get a high price like that, but it's actually not that easy to achieve in the market that we're in. Low inventory is definitely your friend in this market, but you have to position your property you have to market it properly, and you have to price it properly to get those highest prices. We'll go through that a little bit more later, but every moment in the market is different. And this moment that we're in right now calls for a different marketing strategy than we would have called for, say, 2 years ago. So, it may not be a great time for everybody to sell, but if you're willing to put a plan together and stick to the plan, we can usually get you a really good result. So one of the questions is, have you owned your property long enough? So we call that the break-even horizon. It's usually about 5 years of ownership in New York City. As you know, if you've already bought and you're planning on selling, the closing costs associated with purchasing a home and selling a home are really quite high. Rashidah is going to take us through that. But that means that even with inflation and appreciation, it can take a while for you to get to the point where you're going to have a sort of net positive at your sale. So Rashidah, what are some of the ways that closing costs take away from your profit?
Yeah, so New York is one of the few states that has both a New York City and a New York State transfer taxes. If you're in the boroughs, King County, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Staten Island, Bronx, Queens, you are subject to the New York City transfer tax, which is based on the purchase price. It ranges from anywhere between 1% to 1.425%, depending on the purchase price. New York State overall has a transfer tax as well, and that's a flat 0.4%. So right there, you can see already your transfer taxes that you have to pay is nearly 2%, just on the transfer taxes, depending on the purchase price. So you want to make sure that you know what your transfer taxes are going to be. Also, if you have a co-op, some co-ops may have what we call a flip tax, which is a percentage of the purchase price. Some do it that way. Some of them do it based on the number of shares you own in the co-op, but you always want to speak with your management company or with the board if there's no management company to find out what's the flip tax for your building. I've seen flip taxes sometimes as 5%, 2%, and it can be based on the gross purchase price versus your profit. So you really want to understand what that is for a co-op if there's a flip tax. Condominiums typically don't have a flip tax, but sometimes they have an option fee. So you want to find out if that's something that your condominium has, which you want to consider as part of your closing costs. If you're looking at both co-ops and condos, they may have miscellaneous fees such as move-out fees, document preparation fees. So always speak with your management company if you're selling your co-op or your condominium to find out what the fees are for that particular property. Overall, every property, whether it's a co-op, condo, or a house, you're going to have transfer taxes. If you have a mortgage on the property, your mortgage has to be paid off. If it's a co-op and you have a mortgage on the property, there's also a payoff attorney that you have to pay, and also that has to get paid as well at the closing. You have your realtor commission, and then of course you have paying off the real estate taxes, open water, basically any judgments, liens, utilities, anything like that you have on the property that have to be paid, you have to pay that at closing. Attorney fees as well, your attorney fee you have to pay at closing. So those are kind of your, overall you're looking at roughly about 8%. Capital gains you don't have to pay at closing, but it is something that you do want to consider, especially depending on how long you've owned the property. Definitely speak to an accountant. I can give you basically kind of like a rough is if you own the property as your primary residence, you have an exemption up to $250,000 per individual. If it's a married couple, it's $500,000. If you lived in the unit or the property 2 out of the last 5 years as your primary residence. If it's more than that, then definitely you want to speak to your accountant about capital gains. if it's investment property that you're selling, or maybe it's a two-family and you rented out one of the units, or it's your condo and you've been subleasing it. You want to think about maybe doing a 1031 exchange if it's a significant capital gains that you may have. And we can have a full discussion just on 1031 exchange. A 1031 exchange basically is just something where you're selling investment property and you have to purchase another investment property within a certain amount of time period, which is very strict on those rules on identifying property and buying that property. And this is where you can defer your capital gains. You're not paying capital gains. You're just kind of pushing it down the line, because the thought about it is that you're going to continue to buy investment property and you minimize the capital gains that you have overall. So that's for another discussion. But if you're just a primary residence, you're looking at roughly about 8%, not including your capital gains. That's just your transfer taxes, realtor commission, attorney fees, and then of course split tax if you're looking at a co-op. I don't think I missed anything, but that should be roughly.
I know it's a lot. They really do get you a lot. And then one thing I just want to mention, in case anybody's been following the news about this lately, is when it comes to realtor commission, there may be some shifting guidance on this. The industry standard in our market has been that sellers pay the broker fees for both their own agent and the agent that represents the buyer. There has been a recent judgment in a case that wasn't here in New York, but will have implications, I think, probably nationwide. And we don't really have any new guidance on that at this point, but if you are signed up for our newsletters, we are going to be adding information about it as we go along. So there may come a time when sellers are not directly paying buyers' brokers, but we're not sure what that's going to look like, but we'll keep you posted as that moves along. All right, so after you've factored in all of these, the cost of sale, you've still decided to sell. Our next question is really, do you have a plan for after you sell? So if this is more, we like to look at this as a huge transformation that you're going through. You're going from point A to point B, and there's a transaction that happens like right around here, but we're really interested in knowing where you go. What's your plan for after you sell? Because if we can't get you all the way to point B, it might not be the best time for you to sell. So that's a huge factor that we want to go through at the beginning. So what's your plan? Are you downsizing? Have you already identified a place that you want to move into? Are you going to move into a rental? Are you leaving the state? So let us know more about what that is, so that we can tailor your sale to make this process as stress-free as possible. So if you don't have a place to go yet, that can be a huge issue in your sale at present. So there is, we'll get into it a little bit later, but if you don't know where you're going to be going, sometimes we want to solve that first before we sell your home. But if you're flexible on your timeline, or if you've, say, already paid off your mortgage and you have a really low mortgage, sometimes if the market is too intense the way it is right now, it might make more sense for you to rent your home out for a little bit and then sell it. So we go through all of those possibilities with you. There is no one right way to sell your home. And if we don't feel like we can actually get you to your bottom line sale price, we're going to work with you to figure out some alternatives to selling now that can maybe make sense, and you can hold it until the market improves. But those are answers that we really want to have before we put your place on the market. So it can take time to sell a home, right? So it's really anywhere from 4 to 6 months in a perfect scenario to get to the closing table. So I think we have a link that we're going to add to the chat about answering this question of, I'm selling my home, but where will I live? But this is a big part of the strategy, especially right now, is figuring out where you're going to go. So, all right, we've figured it out. We have a whole plan in place. You've decided to sell, and you've answered all these questions. You've come up with a strategy with your agent, and now it's time to start the selling process. So the first thing that you want to do is really assemble your team. So we have a list of questions that we're going to share with you that we think are really helpful to ask a real estate agent from a seller's point of view. So we're going to add that in the chat as well. But you really want to find someone who has what you feel is a workable strategy for selling your home. And you also want to find somebody who is an expert in your market. So, Brooklyn neighborhoods are very idiosyncratic. They all have their own quirks. You definitely want somebody who understands the quirks of your neighborhood. You want somebody who can really sing its praises and speak specifically to why your home is so great and why the neighborhood is so great. And you should also speak to somebody who understands what's happening in the market right now. So talk about what have they sold recently? That's a big key. I think there's somebody who still has talking points from 2021 is not going to be able to navigate this market well. And it's something that we're seeing right now is that people are overpricing homes. They're sitting on the market. They're making unrealistic claims to sellers, and it really just wastes everybody's time. So sometimes the broker who says, oh, I can sell it for the highest price is not the person who's going to actually get you the highest price. I mean, I think that probably goes without saying, but in this market, it's more true than it ever has been, is that overpricing is killing deals right now. And you need somebody who understands how to navigate this. Now, that said, you don't want to leave any money on the table. So make sure you find somebody who has a strategy that feels reasonable to you. And also you want people who understand how you communicate and communicate well with you. So you'll get this sense when you're doing an interview with somebody. You'll get the sense even when you're just setting up an interview with somebody, is that are you somebody who wants to communicate via text message? Are you somebody who really likes to have everything written in email? Do you feel comfortable working in the cloud or in a project management software? Or do you want things written down and handed to you on a piece of paper? Whatever is your communication style, make sure you find somebody who matches it, because you don't want to feel like you're having to learn a new language just to do this work. And then you're also going to have to hire a real estate attorney. Do not wait until the last minute to do this. So before you put your home on the market, you definitely want to have a conversation with a real estate agent or two to find somebody you want to hire. So Rashidah, what do you think you should ask a real estate attorney before hiring them?
I think things you should definitely ask the attorney. One is, do they practice real estate primarily, or are they focusing on other areas of the law? Because you really don't want an attorney that is doing personal injury and is going to be in court, or that doesn't know real estate law. Also, of course, you want to find out how long they've been practicing. Do they represent sellers? Do they represent purchasers? Are they residential attorney? Do they do residential deals, or are they commercial transactions? Also, just as a real estate attorney has to have what we call as an escrow account, because your attorney is the one that's going to hold your deposit in escrow until the closing. So that's also one of the reasons you want to make sure that you have an attorney that's been practicing, that does real estate law, and that focuses on real estate law as well. Ask them, do they have support staff? Are you going to be dealing primarily with the attorney, or are you going to be dealing with the paralegal? Because you really want to have, if you're speaking with an attorney, you want to make sure that the attorney is the one that's overseeing and making sure that the deal gets through. And of course, an attorney can have support staff, but you want to make sure that you are actually being represented by an attorney during your transaction. So those are my primary things that I tell clients to always, or somebody to look at. How long they've been practicing? Will you be working with that attorney primarily? Also, what is their, as Tina has said, how do they communicate? What's their turnaround time when sending out a contract? So definitely want to make sure that you match with the correct, with the right attorney on your style as well, as you start this process, because it can be pretty overwhelming, especially in the beginning process. And just, communication is always key. When this is a big transaction for you, you're selling your property, which you may have owned for many, many years, or even if you owned it for a couple of years. It is something that, you want to make sure that you have the right experts, making sure that they understand the contract and get you to that closing table.
So once you've assembled your team, we're really going to dig deep into your property itself. So we always talk about, we want to tell a consistent story to people. And a lot of that means we want to make sure we understand the story of your building. So your attorney and your real estate agent will both go through the property records for your building. So there may be some things going on with your building that you don't know about, but that are showing up in the public record. So the Department of Buildings may have a violation on your property that you don't know about. You may have an open permit that you thought was closed from some electrical work that you did years ago. This is all work that we want to address prior to listing the home. So if there are any issues, any legal issues with the building, if there's for example, a mortgage that you didn't realize, a mortgage payoff that you hasn't recorded, these are all things that we want to have addressed prior to putting the property on the market. So make sure that you have time to go through with your attorney and with your real estate agent the history of your building, and also what are some issues that your building might be having. So just because if you have a leaky roof, if you have a boiler that's going to need to be replaced, those are all things you want to tell us beforehand. They're not things that you want to hide from anybody. You can sell a home with a leaky roof and a busted boiler. Those are things that can happen, but we need to know about it ahead of time. If it's something that you feel like you want to get fixed before we market it, that's something that you can do. If you don't have the money, and you won't have the money until you sell the home to fix it, we can figure out other workarounds, such as a credit at closing to your buyer so that they can do that work after they purchase. So don't be shy about all of this. It's like going to the doctor, like don't hide anything from us, because it's all going to come out eventually. And we definitely want to build a story around your building that incorporates any of its sort of quirks and needs. There's no perfect property. And so if there are deficiencies, we want to be able to address those right away. We want to be able to disclose those to buyers as necessary. And we want to be able to address them ahead of time if we possibly can. So and then that puts it, let's say your house is, you just inherited it, and it is, nobody's done any work on it for 30 years. We can sell that house. There's a story we can tell around that house. It doesn't have to look like a shiny new, recently renovated developer's property. And you'll find that there are buyers who don't want those shiny new developer properties. They want something with character, and they want to do some work on a home themselves and make it their own. So don't be shy or feel like you have to completely gut renovate your home prior to putting it on the market. So we just want to make sure we're telling a consistent story about that. The easiest things that we can do also to appeal to a wider market have to do with things like little touch-ups around the house, washing windows, painting, and staging the home. So making sure that the photos, which are the first thing buyers fall in love with, making sure that the photos are showing your home in the best possible light. So yeah, a note on staging, we do real staging. We do not do virtual staging. We find that virtual staging actually slows down sales and confuses buyers. So buyers want to they want to see the photos, and then when they show up on the property, they want the property to look like the photos. This is a completely reasonable expectation for buyers to have. But you would be surprised at how many people say, oh, we're going to do virtual staging to show people what it's going to be like. Well, you know what? Some people don't like the virtual staging look anyway, and then they won't come to your home. And then the people who fall in love with the virtual staging are going to be disappointed when they get there and it's not there. So, real staging, real photographs, tell a consistent story in the marketing, in the language around it, in your disclosures, and in the staging of the home. So, okay, we got it all staged. It's ready to go. We have great copy. We've got floor plans. We've got everything listed. We put it up on the internet, and now the buyers are coming in. So we are, we're going to give you a link about the dangers of virtual staging. It's with beware virtual staging. It's like good for our post Halloween. So if we have marketed your home properly, you can expect offers within the first 2 weeks, even in a tough market. So if you're not getting offers after your second open house on a property, we've done something wrong. So it means that we've probably mispriced it. It could be something that we've done in the marketing, but most likely if we're not receiving an offer within the first 2 weeks, we've mispriced it. So we do really treasure all the offers that come in. So the first offer is sometimes the best offer. So don't be just if the first offer comes in and it's a really good offer, like say it's at the full asking price, don't assume that you've underpriced the home. That first buyer is somebody who's quite serious, been in the market for a long time, has looked at all the comparable properties, has maybe been outbid on something that was like your home. They understand the value of it, and they're proceeding in a serious way. So always take that first offer seriously, and also always counter any offer. If you get a low offer in, and don't be insulted by it. Like, just as much as possible, it's hard not to take the stuff personally, but some people just want to see if they could get it for less. That doesn't mean they're not going to come up to the number you need them to come up to. So everybody has a different process as a buyer. And so sometimes you have to meet the buyers where they are. And if the buyer says, I'm going to offer you 20% below the listing price, you can counter and say, oh, thank you for your offer, but we're really sticking with our asking price for now. We've only been on the market for 3 days, so we'll let you know if we're calling for highest and best offers at some point in the future. Anyway, just like keep those offers alive, because sometimes a lowball offer comes up and becomes your best offer. So don't try not to be insulted when the low ones come in. Anyway, if we've done it right, we've got those offers in. It is really important at that point that we have all of your paperwork in order, because as soon as you accept an offer, the clock starts ticking. So let's say you get multiple offers, you're over your asking price. It's great. This is wonderful. We had 4 offers in, we're going with the highest offer, and we have a backup offer in cash, and everything is great. And then you say, so who should I use as a real estate attorney? That's going to kill your deal. You have to have your real estate attorney ready to go, because as soon as we've established what those deal terms are, and we have to send those deal sheets out to the attorneys, and then they really have to go. And this is where the clock starts ticking. So Rashidah, what do you do when you get the deal sheet from the selling agent?
So I had you over. Next slide, please, stop there. So what we know, once we get that deal sheet, it starts to get into contract. But way before getting into contract, we want you, as you hear today, start thinking about the documents that you need to prepare yourself for getting you into contract. If you have a co-op or a condo, you want to start putting together, getting your offering plan, your last 2 years financials, any house rules, any applications, any sublet applications, any of the condominium or the co-op documents, because your realtor is going to need this in order to turn it over to the buyer, so the buyer's attorney can do the due diligence once your offer is accepted, if you're looking at a co-op or a condo property. If you have a house that you're putting on the market, things that you want to start putting away, especially as you start cleaning up and preparing the house for staging and things like that, don't throw away your paperwork. I tell clients, put it aside or scan all of the paperwork, but don't shred anything, because it may be something that you may need. Definitely, if you have the deed, you could put that aside. Not a big deal if you don't have the deed, because it can always be looked up in the system. If you have the owner's policy, which is a title insurance policy that you got when you purchased the property, put that aside as well. If you have a survey of the property, which looks like a diagram of the property, you want to put that aside as well, because the buyer may need that once we get into contract. So really, any of the documents, the ownership documents that you have for your property. If you paid off your mortgage and you have the paperwork for that, put that aside, because sometimes it comes up on title that a mortgage was paid off and they never recorded that satisfaction. So your attorney will find that helpful. And also, if it's a co-op, who has your original stock certificate and your original proprietary lease? If there's a mortgage, we know that, there's a mortgage on the property, that means your lender has it. However, if there's no mortgage on the property or you paid off that prior to you selling the property, we want to make sure that you have those original documents. So you want to put all of those in a safe place. So once you get that deal sheet that the realtors have negotiated, it goes out to the attorney. They can start with that due diligence already. Farah, if you want to go to the next slide. So we talked about the current deed, we talked about the stock and lease, your owner's policy, your survey. Things you can start thinking about ahead of time is looking up the property. You can have your attorney that you spoke to in advance do a quick search to see if there's any violations on the property. Sometimes if there's a house, there may be a sidewalk violation that you may not know of that takes time to clear up. There may be, if you did work on the property and you hired a contractor, maybe there's an open electrical application or plumbing or a job work that wasn't closed off by your contractor. So you want to make sure that you have all of those documents together so that when you get ready to go into contract, there's no hiccups, or hopefully less of a hiccup as you get into contract or sale.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. So and one thing, just when we talk about all of these documents, it sounds like an enormous amount of work for you to do. One of the things that's been great about the way the internet works for our business is that so many of these things are available online as PDFs. These are things that we can find. And if you are selling a co-op, for example, and you say, I have no idea what the sublet policy is, I've never done that before. This is, again, before we list your home, we are going to be in communication with your management company of your condo, of your co-op. We want to know what all the rules are around showing. We want to know all those things. We also want to get all of that paperwork so we've got it ready to hand over immediately. So if you don't have anything, don't worry about it. We're going to be able to find it for you. And especially for co-ops lately, there's if your management company or your co-op is using Board Packager, for example, a lot of those things are just right there, and we can just pay some money and download them if you don't already have them. So those are all things that we just need to we'll get it sorted. I know it seems like a lot, but we'll get it sorted. Again, we just don't want to be hunting around for these things during the week between accepted offer and contract signing, because that's about how long it takes. There's an inspection that usually happens. Sometimes people waive the inspection, but your prior to contract signing, you want to have that inspection done. Occasionally something will come up in the inspection that even with all of your disclosures and ours showing it, none of us saw, we missed it. And sometimes you'll have to make an adjustment to your sale price or add a credit at closing for something that comes up in an inspection. Especially right now, you don't want buyers to be sort of scared off of a property for something that can be addressed with a relatively small amount of money. We want to hang on to those people, because the next buyer is going to do an inspection too. So if we don't get it taken care of for the first buyer, it's not like the next buyer is not going to notice. So we definitely want to be able to address those things as we move along. So an inspection is something that often happens during this period of time. And then in the kind of best case scenario, we can run through this due diligence and be done in a week. Sometimes it takes, 10 days. But if we get to 2 weeks after contract signing, after accepted offer, 2 weeks after accepted offer, and we don't have a signed contract, everybody's going to start to get nervous. And we really want to get that contract signed before your buyer can get a little bit of buyer's remorse and back out. So now we are in contract, and we're going to, so that's a huge relief for me. Once we get to contract, it's more work for Rashidah, but once we get to contract, I can take a little bit of a break, but not much of a break, because next I need to start getting you into your next, we got to get you to your final destination. So I'm going to work on making sure the house still looks great at the time of the appraisal, that we're starting to get your things packed up. We're addressing anything that came up in the inspection that you've agreed to cure or fix, and that we're prepping for you to be able to move into your next home, whether that's looking at apartments for you to purchase, if it's looking at apartments for you to rent, or if it's just figuring out which long distance mover is going to get all your stuff to California. Like, that's what I'm going to be doing at that point. And Rashidah is going to continue working on the deal.
Mhm. So once you're in contract, things move pretty quickly. So that's why it's important that you kind of have that plan as you start thinking about putting your property on the market. A standard contract, if you're selling a house or a condo, is on or about 60-day closing. So that's really 2 months. And it moves pretty quickly, even if you think, oh, it's 2 months. Those days actually move pretty quickly. If you're looking at a co-op, your closing is typically around 60 to 90 days. Sometimes it can be longer than that, depending on how quickly the buyer gets their mortgage and how quickly the co-op actually interviews them and then schedules and then approves them. That can really take a longer time. So once again, if you whatever property you're looking at, between 60 to 90 days for your closing for a house to a co-op transaction. So as a seller, the big part of you, once you sign the contract, it's time for me to relax, because in the back end, the buyer is working on their mortgage. The realtor is working with the buyer to get approved by the co-op. The attorneys are doing what we call is looking at the title search or making sure that there's no issues that have to be cleared up. So this becomes important because some of those documents that I said that you should put aside, once the attorney gets that title search or that lien search, if something comes up, they may need those documents to help clear it up sooner rather than later. Because it can take, depending on what the issue is, it may take a little while to clear up. If there's a violation on the property, depending on what type of violation, your contract will typically state that all violations have to be cleared prior to closing. So if you wait and then find out, there's a building department violation, it's going to take me 60 to 90 days to get this cleared with the Department of Buildings, because they don't care that you have a 60-day closing. They take their time. And you're in, how many properties in New York City. So that also can hold up a closing. So always important to kind of prepare yourself for things that may come up and get the documentation together. But getting that contract provision is for the buyer to get their mortgage is typically 30 to 45 days. Now you're in a firm contract, whether it's a condo or a house. If the buyer isn't able to get their mortgage, they typically do have a right. Well, they do have a right to cancel the contract and get the return of the deposit. So that's also something that you have to take into consideration. Closing date, as I said, 60 to 90 days. And the day of the closing is when you turn over the keys. The property has to be delivered vacant and broom clean. That's where your contract will have standard language in there, unless prior to you signing this contract, it was disclosed that, hey, I'm buying and selling. So I need a couple of days after the closing, which we call as post-possession. So a conversation you need to have with your attorney, with your agent, always before, even when you put the property on the market, on your, what happens when you have to vacate the property, because at the day of the closing, that's when the buyer is expecting to move in and get those keys. So the property has to be delivered vacant and broom clean. The buyer actually does a walkthrough, typically 24 to 48 hours prior to the closing. So you want to make sure that you're out in time frames to have enough time to do that walkthrough and make sure nothing was damaged, make sure the property was cleaned, so that you don't have issues at your closing. Because at the closing, it's really supposed to be a happy day for you. You're getting the funds and you go straight to your bank and depositing that big check. You really don't want to be a sad occasion where you forgot, you didn't move out, and you issues with not knowing where to, you realizing you don't have a place to move to, things like that as you start getting closer to that closing time period.
Yeah, we're not going to let that happen to you. I think that's one of the things that that we as agents do, is we do keep that moving along for you, and it can be really overwhelming, especially if you lived in a home for a long time or you have a lot of things that you need to move. We're here to help you if you want to donate things, if you want to get things, if you need the junk luggers to come, we can arrange all of that for you too. So we've got great people to help with all of that so that you don't have to be too overwhelmed by it. And then when we do that final walkthrough that Rashidah was speaking about, everything that we've agreed to in the deal needs to be in evidence at the final walkthrough. So if there were certain things that you excluded from your sale, for example, if you had a beautiful chandelier that was that you inherited from your grandmother, and you want to take that chandelier with you, that is something that you can exclude from your sale. So we would write that into the deal sheet. We want to know ahead of time that that's going to be excluded. And so we would have to remove that piece before the final walkthrough. But if there are things that we had agreed to fix, for example, so the air conditioning wasn't running properly, and so you're going to get an HVAC technician out to make sure that it's working. Let's say the HVAC technician comes out and can't fix it. That's something that we want to have addressed prior to that final walkthrough, so that the attorneys can, so that we can work to say, here's an estimate of what that cost will be. Can we just give you a credit at closing to cover that? There's a few different ways to solve those problems. They get more, usually fixing it yourself is the least expensive way to do it. So we encourage you to fix it yourself, but if you can't do it, we want to address that before we get to the final walkthrough. And little things can be really sort of throw a wrench in the works. You know, we want to make sure that all the outlets work. We want to make sure that your appliances are working. Those things are, those basic mechanicals need to be functioning when you go to the sale. So when you're on your way moving out, if somebody, you know, accidentally backs a hand truck into an outlet, let us know so we can get that fixed before we get into the final walkthrough. So Rashidah mentioned the idea of a post-possession period. So if, let's say you found a home that you want to move into, but you can't close on that until you have the proceeds from this sale. So in the olden days, meaning like a few years ago, that wasn't that hard for us to arrange. There would be a post-possession period. You would pay basically rent, a prorated rent back to your seller, or to the buyers, the people who are now the owners of your home, so that you can stay in the house for a few days and not move twice. But if you have a second, Rashidah, to talk about shifting landlord-tenant law in New York and how that has impacted, let's say, attorneys' appetite for post-possession agreements.
So I guess, yes, post-possessions, I always say is, you know, as an attorney, is kind of one of the bane of our existence after closing, because the idea is that some of your funds are not released to you on the day of the closing. Your attorney has to hold back a certain amount, and the longer you plan on staying in possession of the property after the closing, the more of your money is held back in escrow. And what that means is that it's not turned over to you until you turn over the keys. And if there's an issue that comes up during that time period, when the buyer comes and do their final walkthrough, that money cannot be released to you until it's agreed upon between both parties. And it can be something as minuscule as an outlet not working, and you have $20,000 in escrow, and it's a $20 fix, but it can't be released to you until that issue is resolved. And it can sometimes take weeks, depending on the parties involved and what has to happen and what they determine is the issue. So I always encourage clients to get your funds on the day of the closing, make sure it's vacant and broom clean. But in those situations where there is post-possession absolutely necessary, sorry, the lights just, we have auto lights on. Everyone left for the day and we have the auto light on.
That's good. It's for energy efficiency. I'm really glad to see it.
Exactly. So this is what, as I say, that for the post-possession in those situations where you do need it, there's an agreement that is signed that says that there isn't a landlord-tenant relationship created, because with the new landlord-tenant laws, if the person is staying more than 30 days, even if you have that agreement, they could potentially say there is a landlord-tenant law in there. And you know, there's different ports that you have to, different port and procedure in order to get the person out of the property. So you want to really make sure that the seller, as a seller, you want to make sure that you're able to vacate in time of that per your agreement, because there's penalties in there. There's, I say, your funds are held back in escrow. And the purchaser ultimately is the one that has to approve the release of those funds to you. So if the purchaser is not happy, then your funds are held up until it is resolved. But we do have those post-possession agreements in there. And one thing, you do want to have this conversation at the beginning of the process, because your contract, if it says delivered vacant and broom clean, if you later on discover that you need that post-possession, the buyer does not have to agree to that, and you must vacate, or you can't close and you risk losing your buyer unless they agree to now do an amendment to the contract and include a post-possession clause in there. And just thinking about, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say that we're talking about establishing a tenancy. Can you also talk about if somebody is selling a multifamily home and you have a tenant? This is we didn't even actually go into this at the beginning, but those new landlord tenant laws are really impacting homes that are selling with tenants in place.
So if you have a tenant, it's a multifamily. So this, we're just talking, it's just you have to vacate. So now we're talking about a multifamily where you have a tenant in place. If the tenant is month to month, previously, month to month, 30-day, you send them a 30-day notice, they have to vacate. If they don't, then you can commence a landlord tenant action. With the new laws, you have to give them a longer notice, even if they're month to month. So you're looking at potentially having to give them 60 to 90 days, depending on how long they've lived in your unit. And now remember, your closing date on your contract is on or about 60 days. So obviously that impacts how your ability to close if you're just giving your tenant notice to vacate and they determine that, hey, I'm going to be not so nice. I'm going to hold up your closing. And that vacated is just telling them when they have to vacate. Doesn't mean that they must vacate on that date. It now tells you, now you've given them 60 to 90 days. You told them they have to get out. Now, after that, you have a right to start a landlord-tenant eviction process. And as you can imagine in New York, that's many months. It can be at minimum 6 months to get a tenant out. Longer than that, obviously. So you want to discuss whether, you're selling the unit with the tenant in place. And if you're not selling it with the tenant in place, do you have plans? Is your tenant going to actually be moving out in time for the closing? Does your tenant have an exit plan? Do you have an exit plan? Because a buyer, especially if you have a tenant, is not going to want to close, even with a post-possession with an actual tenant in place, because that immediately is landlord tenant. And that, for a potential buyer, the post-possession clause is not going to be, doesn't go towards a tenant. It only goes to you since you're not a tenant of your own property. That's a whole different avenue. They'll have to start immediately with a landlord tenant action. So if you have a tenant multifamily, speak with your realtor, speak with your attorney on what that plan is to do with that tenant, because the contract typically will say have no tenants unless it says you're just buying it with the tenant in place.
Right. And we can sell with a tenant in place. Absolutely. We do it all the time. It's not that it's impossible. It is going to impact who your buyer is. So that's why we really want to know in advance. Like if you have a tenant who just started, they have a year left on their lease and they're paying a really nice, like high market rate, that actually may be attractive to some buyers. It's not going to be attractive to a buyer who wants to occupy that apartment, but it is potentially attractive to an investor, for example, to have somebody where they know, well, I'm going to renovate unit 1 and it's going to be great to have somebody rent paying in unit 2 while I do that. So you'll find people to buy it. We just need to know so that we can recognize those buyers when they show up. And we certainly don't want to be marketing it to somebody who wants to live in the unit that is currently occupied by somebody else. So again, like we'll tailor this process to your specific needs and your specific property, but we all need to be really clear and transparent about that at the beginning so that we don't run into these hiccups at the end. Also, it's like you don't want to have that relationship with your tenant. The more notice you can give a tenant to get out just generally is great. But if you can't afford to carry your home without collecting that monthly rent, that's something that we need to know about in advance. And it may mean that you take a lower price for your home than you would if you could deliver it vacant. But if that's the difference between you like white knuckling it through a couple of months while we wait for a closing to happen, and you're not able to like buy milk, we don't want to see you in that position either. So if you need to keep the tenant in place because you need that income, there are absolutely workarounds for it and perfectly legal ways to transfer property.
Yes. So I think the key takeaway is preparation. The more you speak with your realtor, the more you speak with your attorney. As a seller, you can tailor the contract, you can tailor the transaction to hopefully making sure that you are, covered in the scenarios that you need to be.
All right, so we made it all the way through. We got to your closing. Rashidah helped schedule the 10 people who need to be, there's a lot of people who need to be scheduled for a closing. It's still a very complex transaction. in this day and age when you can just like wire money around the world, a real estate transaction is still largely an in-person, ink on paper transfer. So you've made it through, your hand is cramping from all the signing, but now you have the big check and you can deposit it. And hopefully if we've planned properly, then it's an easy shift for you into your new home and you begin the next stage of your life. So normally we take questions after this, but I think we don't have any questions in the chat. So maybe we can just wrap this up a little bit. What do you think?
I think that's fine. I think we've had a great session. I hope everyone got some, tidbits on preparing yourself as a seller, to put your property on the market and the legal documents you need. Obviously, I'm here as well, and my information is on the screen, to reach out if you have any questions. As far as things, if you need to look up your deed, things like that, you can always contact my office as well.
Right. And you can reach us. We'll send you more information if you want to follow up and have another private conversation with us. We're always happy to do it. It costs you nothing. And we love talking to people about this process. It's an honor to be part of people's lives as they go through this transition. And we would love to do that with you.
Well, have a great night.
Yes. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Rashidah.